Welcome to the Healthy Investor Podcast with Bob Mastroianni, where you and I will learn from successful real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and other highly driven individuals about their journey and the healthy habits and routines that play an integral part of their growth. Before we jump into this podcast, I want to tell you a little bit about an event that's coming up this November and how you can be a part of it. Multifamily Mastery 5 in Orlando, Florida this November, sponsored by the Jake and Gino community. If you're a new investor looking to learn about multifamily investing, or if you're a seasoned investor looking to grow your multifamily business, this is the place to be. There's a lot of networking, education, and I just saw the speaker list and you will not be disappointed. Jam-packed with excellent speakers with experience in the multifamily industry. Multifamily Mastery 5, November 5th and 6th in Orlando, Florida. If you look at the show notes, I'll have a special link for Healthy Investor Podcast listeners only. Click on the link and enter code MASTERY2022 to get $200 off of your Multifamily Mastery 5 tickets. I'll be there in Orlando, and I hope to see you there too. Welcome back to the Healthy Investor Podcast. Today, I have with me Anthony Vicino. Anthony is a serial entrepreneur who has helped build multiple multi-million-dollar companies from the ground up by creating efficient systems that scale, utilize value-based content marketing strategies, and always focusing on providing exceptional end-user experience. He is a best-selling author, investor, and small business owner who successfully managed his own personal portfolio of multifamily assets spread across the country before joining forces with his partner, Dan Kruger, in 2019 to create Invictus Capital. Together, Anthony and Dan are driven to help people achieve financial security by providing solid multifamily-based investment opportunities in an environment of trust, transparency, and clarity. Anthony is also a coach and a mentor. Anthony Vicino, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bob. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, great. So a lot of things I want to dig into with you today. So let's just start out first with sort of how Invictus Capital came to be, where you are today. I know a little bit about your portfolio. So you have over 250 units currently and over $40 million worth of portfolio under property management. So, or under management. So tell me a little bit about how you got to this point, a little bit about your story.
It's been a windy road.
That's great.
I'll start there. The universe kept trying to put real estate in front of me at multiple points in my life, and I kept ignoring it. So the first time was in college. I was living with my roommate and his dad, and they were doing fix and flips on single family homes. In exchange, I would live with them and help out. But the thing that I learned, we learned really quickly about me, is that I can swing the hammer, I can't hit the nail. So I wasn't super helpful in a renovation construction world. I was very good at demolition. Like, you give me that sledgehammer, I go to town. But I did not enjoy it. I did not enjoy flipping houses. But that was what I thought real estate investing was at that point. Kind of like the HGTV model of fix and flip, go buy a shanty, fix it up, make it pretty, and sell it for $1 million. But I didn't like that. So coming out of college, I was like, well, if that's real estate, I don't want anything to do with it. I just kind of went off and did my own thing for the next 10, 15 years. And then at some point, real estate came back into my world. It was at a time when I had gotten bit by the entrepreneur bug. And I was like building businesses. I was really enjoying that. And I had a friend who came to me and he's like, hey, let's go buy these quads together. And I was still remembering the pain of those fix and flips. And I was like, you know what, that does not sound like something I wanted to spend my time on, but I will give you money, you go do it. So it was kind of like investing in my friend, giving him the means to go do this thing. But it really wasn't about the real estate at that point. It wasn't.
So you were a bit of a passive investor at that point.
Exactly. Great. Before I even knew what that meant,
Yeah.
I was just really just giving some money to a buddy to go do a thing. And a couple of years later, we still have those assets. It's been great. We bought those in 2012 and that was a good time to be buying stuff. But the very definition of passive for me. And the universe tried one more time to get me to look at real estate. As I was nearing the end of, I was nearing the exit point of one of the businesses that I've been working on since 2017. And this was at the end of 2018 where I was like looking down the barrel and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to be needed here very much longer, because the systems are in place. We have the awesome team in place. Like this thing is running, and I was finding myself more and more bored throughout the day. And I felt like I was in the way of my team. And that's just not a good feeling when you're, running a business and you just don't really feel like it's connected with your purpose anymore. And you don't feel like you're contributing meaningfully. So I was starting to look around me at other avenues, other ways that I could build purpose into my life and like what that next adventure was going to be. And for whatever reason, real estate, like this time it hit me in the head and I was like, that's what I want to do. I always tell people like the aha moment was I was driving into downtown Minneapolis and I was looking up the skyscrapers and I was hit with the question, like, who actually owns skyscrapers? Like, who owns those buildings? Like,
Wow.
I'd never really thought about it, right? Like, when you start to go down the rabbit hole, you realize, like, oh yeah, there's companies and some funds that are in there, but there's like, when you scale down to like the apartment building level, a lot of those are just owned by mom and pop people just like us. In a lot of cases, people pull in their resources to go buy these assets. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to go buy real estate because it changed like my perspective. It wasn't about me having to go into the buildings and do the renovations and everything myself. Is now looking at them as, okay, each one of these buildings is a small business. And if we understand all the levers that need to get pulled to operate a profitable business, then we can do really well here. And it's not me going to do the work, it's building the team and the systems. And so that's what I started doing on my own. And then in 2019, I joined forces with my partner, Dan Kruger, to form Invictus. And that's really when we started bringing in passive investors into our deals. Up to that point, we had been paying our tuition in the School of Hard Knocks with our own dime. But we were getting so many people asking us, hey, can we invest with you? How do we do this? And we're like, oh, okay. Like, sure. We'll bring you people in. And since then, we've raised close to 15 million in passive investor capital, acquired a lot of real estate in the process. And it's been really rewarding because for me, the whole purpose of investing in the real estate wasn't to make a ton of money. Like I was really fortunate and did well in my other businesses. It was more about creating a vehicle for impact. And real estate allows us to do that in ways I don't think you can do with anything else, because every one of us has some kind of relationship with real estate. Whether you're homeless, at one point in my life, like I glazed over this part, at one point in my life, I was living in the back of a van, homeless. So like, I know what it's like to not have a home, or at least a home, that isn't on wheels.
Traditional. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so as I looked at real estate, we look at like residents and the relationship that they had with their landlords or investors and like their ability to invest in real estate. Like I looked at this landscape and I was like, man, there's a lot of opportunity to make an impact here. And so those are the waters that we play in these days. And it's been a lot of fun.
Wow. Great story. That's amazing. So much to unpack. I know that, your entrepreneurial background and your other business has really made you more of a systems person, sort of putting the right systems in place. So in the opportunities that you're in, obviously you have your partner, Dan, the two of you work together and pretty much have complementary skill sets. So what position do you play? What is your, what type of roles and responsibilities do you prefer to have when it comes to investing and in the investment business?
When it comes to any business, you can think of it as having three legs of a stool, and all businesses are the same. They have an acquisition department, which is responsible for, getting customers in the door or getting deals in the door. There's an operations component, which is fulfilling on the customer demand. So that's your product creation. That's the fulfillment aspect of it. And then there's the finance aspect, which is managing cash flows and receivables, all that stuff. And like, those are pretty much the same three legs of every business. And when you break it down that simply, it's like, okay, well, which seats do I want to sit in? I hate finance. I am. So at one point in my life, I was super poor living in the back of that van. And so the idea of spending money to me is very painful. So finance seat is not a good seat for me because I look at any expenditure as being unnecessary. So okay, that's not a good seat for me. What is a good seat for me though, are the acquisitions and the operations bucket, because on the acquisition side, this is twofold for us. One is bringing in new properties that we can potentially purchase. So that's, managing broker relationships, off-market seller relationships, managing that deal flow. But it also means working with investors and bringing investors into our deals. Because for us, we need deal flow and we need capital flow for us to be able to continue scaling. So that's what I focus on, is that acquisition side. And then also I focus on the operations side of Invictus Capital. What that means is overseeing the team behind the curtains that's making all these deals happen. Whereas Dan, he really sits in the finance seat. He's a numbers nerd. He loves that. So like it's his superpower. It's great for him to sit there. But he also sits in the operations seat of our property management company. Says we have in-house management. We manage our own assets. So he takes over operations of that side, which is ground level, boots on the ground, day-to-day leasing, management, repairs and maintenance, all that stuff. And I take the operations side of the capital business. So that's kind of how we split the roles.
Okay. That's very interesting. We talk a lot about the idea that, do you want to become a real estate investor or do you want to build a real estate business? And I love that you really equate it to, this is similar to every other business. I really like that you've divided the operations into two unique roles that both encompass operations, right? There are operations that are required to keep the capital flow, to keep your investors happy and all that. And then there's the operations that I think more people think about from an operations perspective, which is the property management with it, which is the dealing with tenants or repairs and maintenance and all of those things. So that's interesting. And it's great to see how you and Dan really do complement each other. You complement each other very well on your podcast. We haven't spoken about your podcast yet, but you seem to complement each other very well in your business. Speaking of your podcast, I wanted to transition just a little bit and talk about how I originally came to learn of Anthony Vicino. My wife, Shannon, found Anthony on LinkedIn, started following some of his posts, and then said, "Oh, you have to start listening to this podcast." We started to listen to the podcast. And then not long after that, you released your book, Passive Investing Made Simple. And we purchased the book right away. And I read the book and it dawned on me, I guess I started reading real estate and success books in 2008. And there was a time during that period, you read book after book after book after book, and there's many very similar themes. And you get to a certain point where you say, okay, a lot of these books are pretty similar. Mm-hmm. And your book is very unique. And there was a void in the market. And I didn't realize there was a void in the market for this until I read your book. Your book talks about, first of all, really educates someone who wants to be a passive investor in deals, and educates them on what the process should be like for them, what they should expect as a passive investor, what they should look for in someone who's going to be the operations and someone who's going to handle their money in the deal. But then it does the other thing, which is it takes the active investor and educates them on, this is what your passive investors should expect. And I don't think I've seen any other book like that. So I just wanted to, first of all, give you kudos for that book, because I really enjoyed it. It's saved on my laptop. I refer back to it from time to time, but maybe you can talk just a little bit about the book.
No, that's awesome. I remember, this is funny. I remember Shannon on LinkedIn. I think she DM'd me at one point when she was reading the book, and she's like, I just needed to come over and message you real quick because I got to this one point and it was so cool. And then I ran over to my husband and had to show him. I was like, yeah, stop what you're doing, read this. And I remember thinking like, so I've written, in a past life, I was a science fiction and fantasy author. I've written a dozen books at this point. And every time I read a book, I always assume nobody's going to read it. Like, that's just always, like, if you set your expectations really low, then you can only be ever, pleasantly surprised. And I remember when I got that message from Shannon, I was like, oh, wow, like people are actually reading this. Like people actually, and they're not just reading it and like giving lip service, because this is a person I did not know at this point. I was like, actually getting like value out of this. I was like, that's really cool. Like that. And it's been amazing since it launched last August. It's almost been out for a year. And like the entire time it's just stayed in the top 10 on Amazon. It's just like, it continues to like blow my mind. But I think it's because of what you alluded to, which is it fills a void, which is that a lot of resources out there. And the reason we created it was because as we were looking around, like all the resources on how to be a real estate investor were geared towards people like us that want to go out there and build a real estate investing business. They're like, here's how you go deal with brokers and how you negotiate a deal. And here's how you get lending and debt. And like, but there's so many people out there that want to have exposure to real estate, but they have no interest in doing any of that work.
Yeah.
And we know that there's a world where they can participate in it. But the problem is like, there's not a lot of resources or educational tools for people that want to stay in their W-2 and they want to invest in real estate, but they don't want to do the work. Nothing was geared towards them. And there was one other resource out there that, who was it? It's called The Hands-Off Investor, Brian Burke. And it's fantastic. He's great. The book is really good, but as one of the reviewers kind of pointed out, was his book was a lot like drinking out of a fire hose, whereas our book was more like a water fountain. And that's what we were going for. It was like the coolest compliment we had ever gotten, because we were like, that's what we wanted. We wanted this to be accessible. We didn't want people to feel overwhelmed, because when it comes to investing, I think that's the thing that holds people back, is it feels very overwhelming and complicated from the outside looking in, whether it's real estate or it's stocks or it's crypto. Like, investing just generally is very, very scary for most people, because we weren't really taught it in school, and families don't do a good job of talking about it. And our culture just generally has a taboo against talking about money. And so a lot of people, they feel stupid even asking the questions. And so when you look at big commercial real estate and investing in these buildings, most people go, oh, that's something I could never do. And because they don't even know what questions to ask. And even if they did know which ones to ask, they would still feel kind of stupid and like so uncomfortable stepping into this world. And so we're like, well, let's demystify this, because we know from our experience being on the other side as the active operators are like, guys, this is not brain surgery. This is like, real estate is like the simplest business at the end of the day. Like, it seems big and scary, but it's simpler than a window washing company. And I've had both. Like,
okay.
And we're like, well, if we can just break this down in a way where people can feel like it can be accessible, they can take that first step into it, then we don't care if people come and invest with us. That's not our goal with creating that book. It was, we want as many people to know that this is an avenue, this is a vehicle that they can participate in, because especially right now, if you're invested in crypto or in the stock market, you're getting hammered. It's not been a good month for you.
Yes.
And I have both crypto and stock, so I can say it like I'm bleeding alongside you. And it's like, most people don't realize that they can get solid real estate exposure, and it doesn't require a ton of work. If you just put a little bit of time, listen to a few podcasts, read a book, you can do this, and it will fundamentally change the trajectory of your investment career. It will.
Yeah. And what's interesting, and again, from someone in an active real estate investing perspective, right? So our goal is to find people who can bring funding and financing to a deal. And I feel like, it's very common in our community. I meet people and I know that I'm not the only one that feels this way, right? So I'm transitioning from residential real estate, where 1 to 4 units, I fix and flip some properties, I wholesale some properties. And the way that we purchase properties was that we said, okay, we have this much funding, so we can afford a property that's worth this much. And it was our money, and it was our W-2 income that the banks were looking at, et cetera. And then when you get to that point where you decide to move into larger multifamily, the big giant elephant in the room is, I have no experience in utilizing someone else's money to go to the bank. And so now you can already tell just by the way I'm talking that it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a tug. And then without a book like this, I feel like the responsibility goes on the active investor to educate the passive investor. And the reality is that the active investor probably isn't very comfortable educating the passive investor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
this is the unexpected byproduct of the book that I didn't anticipate, was that as you go through it, it's a playbook for passive investors, but it's also like stealing the other team's playbook, right? Like as an active investor who wants to go raise capital from passive investors, it's like stealing the passive investor playbook. And then you read their plays and you're like, oh, this is what they're going to ask. This is what they're looking for. This is how I should talk to them. This is what I should present to them. This is how I should do that. And it's like, so there's been this on one hand, a strong audience for the passive investors, but the other side is operators who want to learn how to raise capital better and actually have these conversations, especially when you're new. It's very difficult to explain what it is that we do as a multifamily apartment syndicator. Like, what does that even mean to the lay person? Like, because when you're first raising capital, it's going to be from your first ring relationships, your friends, your family, maybe some colleagues. And chances are they're going to bet more on you than on the investment, but they still want to understand the investment. But you're going to be training them from day one, and like they don't have any context. And so the book is a very helpful way, I think, for creating metaphors or different analogies and frameworks to help explain like what is a syndication, first of all, because you start throwing around these big words and people just kind of shut down and get scared. So that was a pretty cool side benefit of the book.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I know for me personally, if someone comes to me and says, I'm interested in investing in real estate passively, where do I begin? I think the first step is to point them in the direction of your book. So
thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to transition over. Obviously, this is the Healthy Investor podcast. And, I found along the way that as I meet more successful people and more self-driven people, that they really have routines or rituals or daily practices that they feel are so important to their growth and to their success. So what does that look like for you? Do you have sort of a daily routine? Do you have activities that you participate in that contribute to your success?
100%. Yeah. So one of the things that I haven't talked about yet is that I have pretty severe ADHD. And when I was young, it was really problematic because I didn't have any way of really harnessing it or controlling it or focusing it, directing it. And so I was just kind of all over the place. And it was frustrating because I think we all feel like that we have great potential and a lot of greatness inside of us. But then like for me, I always felt like a car that its wheels were spinning just inches off the ground, going 1,000 revolutions a second. And I was like, if I could ever just get my wheels on the ground, I would just take off. But I could never quite seem to get them on the ground and get traction. And when I tell people like my story of struggling with ADHD, I find that regardless of whether you have ADHD or you just live in this really highly distractible age, like everybody resonates. And they're like, yeah, I wish I could control my attention, my focus better. And it was really counterintuitive. But the thing that allowed me, and this took me many years, like until like my late 20s, early 30s to really figure out, was that this phrase, I think Jocko Willink uses it, discipline equals freedom. And what that meant for me was it's the creation of discipline and structure in my life that would allow me within those moments of structure and confinement to realize my potential, right? Because so often we feel like we're standing in a room with 10,000 open doors, and you could go through any one of the doors. When you have 10,000 options, it's debilitating, it's crippling. How do you know you're going to go through the right one? And the key to moving forward in life and being successful is to close 999 of those doors and walk through one, because you can only walk through one door at a time. And before I really started to figure that out, I rebelled against the idea of shutting the doors, because freedom to me, like, I have a lot of reasons for this. Like, I was on drugs when I was a kid, on Ritalin, that made me feel trapped in my body. And so like when I got off that, I was like, I don't ever want to feel trapped. I want to feel free. But honestly, like pure freedom without accountability, without direction, without discipline was more frustrating than anything else, because I wasn't getting anything done in my life. And so once I started to realize that and started to play with implementing habits and routines in my life, like the game changed. And it turned out that all those, like that rigor, that discipline, the structures that helped me like get the most out of myself were also really conducive for building businesses. And so those things are very linked for me. When I think about my day, I'm very habitual and like to a fault at times, where when I wake up in the morning, regardless of what time that is, if it's 5 a.m., 6 a.m., or 7 a.m., like what happens from that moment until 1 p.m. is the same every single day. And I block off that entire time so that I can get into this routine where I'm automating activities that enable me to get into my peak state and to do my best work.
So do you require yourself to wake up at a specific time, or are you a little more free about when you wake up?
I used to be very, very regimented with this. So I used to be every day, 5 a.m. I did this for years. What I've discovered recently is, for me, there's three things that help me feel healthy. It's sleep, exercise, and diet.
Okay.
And sleep is one of those things that for whatever reason, I'm not a good sleeper. I have a bedtime every night at 10 p.m. and I have a wind down process, but with ADHD, there's things that make it really hard for my brain to shut down. And so what I found was, and this took a lot of studying with different sleep studies and different tests to realize that like my girlfriend and I will go to bed at the same time. And if I woke up at 5 and she woke up at 5, I would be awake for 50% of the night, just tossing and turning, moving around in my sleep. And so I would wake up and I wouldn't feel very rested. And for many years, I just like, that's how it is. Like, just keep going, hammering, wake up at 5 and just do it. And what I've come to realize now where I'm at in my life is I need to feel fully rested. And so I need to sleep until my body tells me we're done sleeping. And so if that means I wake up at 5 one day and the next day at 7, that's fine. Every night I go to bed at the same time and I let my body tell me when it needs to get up. And it's been amazing. Honestly, I feel so much more clarity of mind and body. The downside is I feel this emotional, psychological guilt about some days when you wake up at 7, you're like, oh, I should have been up at 5. Or I look on Instagram and I see my buddy who's getting up at 4 and I'm like, oh, what am I doing? I wasted all this time, right? So you have to give yourself the emotional, mental space to allow yourself the time to recover. And that's been one of the hardest things, but physically it's felt so good.
Well, that's really interesting. And I know we're going to go a little further down the path of what your morning routine looks like, even into your early afternoon. But this is something that I have found to help my life. You know, I mentioned this to you before we jumped on, but I was a night owl. I was a quote unquote night owl, right? I stayed up and watched all the late night TV. And then I told myself the story that I can't wake up in the morning. And when I adjusted that, the message is often, you have to wake up at the exact same time every day and pick a time. And is it 5? Is it 5:30? Is it 6? Whatever it is, but that's your time. And it's very interesting for me to hear that. I know that you're a systems person. I know you're systematic about your routine and about your schedule, but I also know that feeling of like, sometimes when I go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, sometimes I'm just not falling asleep. And that idea of resting your body is so important the next day. So very interesting to hear your take on that, because I'm sure you already know this, but it differs from a lot of people who tell you the story of you must wake up at this specific time every day. And I think it's very freeing that you've given yourself the latitude to understand that, yes, my body needs the right amount of rest, despite what others say.
Here's the really interesting thing is discipline is a muscle. And in the beginning, you need to develop that muscle and you have to do it in ways that are uncomfortable. And so like habitualizing yourself to say, this is when I'm going to wake up. I wake up at 5 a.m. That is not necessarily at that point about the rest and the recovery as much as it is about becoming a disciplined person who has that muscle. But then there comes a point where just because you have that muscle doesn't mean you always need to flex it. Now you need to understand like when's the opportune moment to flex that muscle. And for me, I know I have that muscle that if I want to, I can wake up at 5 a.m. I can wake up at 4 a.m. I can do that. Like, that's not the problem. The problem is my body doesn't feel as good as it could. Right. And so when I give myself the space to say, I'm going to let my body dictate when and how hard I go, but once I'm up and going, now it's time to go. Right. And so if you're listening to this and your life is a mess and it's not where you want it to be, trust me, I was there. Like, the first thing you have to do is you have to develop the muscle of discipline, because discipline beats out motivation every day, right? Like, because you can only get so motivated and maintain motivation for so long. If you don't have discipline to replace it, you're not going to go anywhere. So, but I've proven to myself that I have that discipline muscle. So I I've changed the game a little bit now. Like, and this is different seasons for different folks, right? And you might not be in the same place in life where I am right now, where you can do that. That's fine. Then you need to get up and get at it. And get, like, when I was living in the back of that van, it was no longer about Anthony, you need to be well rested. It was Anthony, you need to get off your ass and get to it.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. Well, you know, it's interesting. And I've heard the quote before that everyone could be motivated for like 30 to 45 days. Mm-hmm. But then after that, if habit doesn't kick in and discipline doesn't kick in, then motivation starts to wear off, right? Mm-hmm. So now tell us a little bit about what are some of the routine habits that you follow once you're awake and once you've started your morning routine?
So once I start my day, I go into what I call the rules. And the rules are a spreadsheet that just lay out all the different activities that I need to do in a day, where if I can do those, then if I can check all these boxes, I can look back at the end of the day and I can say, that's been a good day. That's been like a successful day. And so it starts first with the journaling. It doesn't have to be much. And the way that I journal kind of fluctuates with time. Sometimes I pose a question. Sometimes it's just stream of consciousness. Sometimes it's just bullet pointing out what it is I am thinking about at any given moment, right? But I find that getting my mind and my body like psychosomatically connected first thing in the morning is incredibly helpful for kind of defining the rest of the day. So it starts with journaling. Then I go into meditation, usually 10 to 15 minutes. And again, this changes too, because I think it's not about doing the same thing every single day. It's about priming yourself to be your best. And sometimes what you need to do to prime is a little bit different. So some days it's meditating and doing what's called yoga nidra, which is just pretty much laying on your back in the dark, almost like sleeping, right? Some days it's staring at a candle. Some days it's going through and doing like internal body awareness, right? So the how kind of fluctuates a little bit, but the actual practice of sitting down and doing a meditation is the same. From there, I go through, I recite my yearly goals, do some affirmations. And I think that's important just to like keep at the top of the mind. What are the things that I'm working towards right now? From there, I do a gratitude practice of just reflecting. What are some things I'm happy for? Like as high achievers, we can so often just be chasing the goal that we don't stop to reflect on the fact that like life is really good. Life is really good as is. Like the fact that I woke up today and even have a chance to like have a conversation or to like sit on the side of the bed, like it's all really good. And I think when you can connect to that, like life just gets so much better. It gets so much better instead of just constantly chasing the next accomplishment, and rather just sitting for a minute and just reveling in how far you've come. Because we've all come a really long way. Like regardless of what you've done with your life, you've come a really long way. So reflecting on that, I think, is super helpful.
There's something to be said for, acknowledging the fact that I'm sure the point is not lost on you that the guy who was living in the van has come such a long way, and the gratitude that you have over that. So I'm sure there's a lot of power in acknowledging that, right?
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that happiness is a choice, and it's a matter of perspective. Here's the really funny thing about living in the van. Like there was a point in my life when I was a professional rock climber. And what that really meant was people paid me money to travel around the world and climb on rocks and live in the dirt all day. And when I'm doing that, I'm living in the back of a van, sleeping in a tent every night. And I don't look terribly different than a homeless person at that point. Right. But it was the coolest job in the world for me.
Yeah.
Fast forward, suddenly my life circumstances change and I'm forced into living in the back of a van because I'd have no money. I have nowhere else to go. So the situation is the same. I'm living in the back of a van. The only thing that's changed is my perspective of the situation. One of them was my dream job. The other was this embarrassment and frustration and disappointment. And the only thing that changed was my perspective of the situation.
Wow. That's powerful. That is very powerful.
And I think when you take that mindset into your day, regardless of where you are in your life and what you're doing, and just realize like, it's just a matter of perspective, and you can shift that at a moment's notice. And when you do, like you do not need to accomplish anything else. All you need to do is appreciate where you are. It's not about being patient. It's about being present.
Great, great. So from there, you've done a lot of the mindset things, the journaling, affirmations. Is this the time of day when you're starting your exercise routine? Do you do an exercise routine at another point? What do you do? You had mentioned, obviously, sleep. You mentioned exercise as one of your 3 pillars for health, and then the other was about diet.
Yep. So in the morning, it kind of fluctuates. So I play a lot of tennis and I do a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So martial art, that's very, very intense. And those are kind of limited based on when I can find a partner.
Okay. Yeah.
So what ends up happening typically is those occur every night in the evening time, because that tends to be whenever everybody else is available. So what that means is in the morning, I don't do any strenuous activity. And this is actually understanding how your body works. Again, like this is an important thing, is that what I've come to realize is that after I do really intense, heavy exercise, I kind of shut down and I get tired and I don't feel like doing much else. Like, and so by putting that and bookending it at the end of my day, like it leads into my shutdown routine for the evening and hanging out with my girlfriend, eating dinner, and then getting ready for bed. Whereas I find when I do really strenuous exercise in the mid morning, let's say, if I go and do a tennis match at 9 a.m., by 1 p.m., I'm kind of like, all right, I'm ready to check out. Like for whatever reason, I'm riding the dopamine high and I'm like, I don't need to do anything else. So, and this is like different strokes for different folks. It took me a long time to figure this out. I used to wake up every morning and lift weights or go running, and those could be really good to get the blood flowing. For me, I just like a lot of trial and error. So the morning is not when I do my heavy workouts, but I do go for walks. I get the blood moving. I try and get like my muscles limber, so to speak.
Okay.
So like,
yeah. Get your body moving. Yeah. Great. Great. Awesome. Well, this is amazing. This is, I love your structure, and I love that you've set your own standard of what works for you. And I think that's, I'd mentioned to you before that I originally started out by doing the Miracle Morning, and for probably the better part of 2 years, I'll have to go back to my journals and check. It was like 635 days or something like that. I did the Miracle Morning. I did what the book told me to do. I did what the lessons were. And now this has been probably the last 3 or 4 years. I've adjusted it to what fits in my routine.
Yeah.
Because I've learned what is working better for me. And sometimes I have to adjust even to see if it really is working better for me. Right. So, and I think that sort of comes with time and with practice, and back to your word, that comes with discipline too. Yeah.
Yeah. What you've alluded to there, I think is super important. So when I started down this path, I didn't start into the Miracle Morning per se, but if you looked at how I started many, many years ago, it was pretty much the same. It's like wake up at 5 a.m., drink some water, get my body moving, journal, say gratitude. Like it's pretty much the same thing. And for a long time, I was every single day doing that routine. And it came to a point where it was more about checking the box than it was getting myself primed to be my best. And when I started to realize that there was now a disconnect between this routine and what I needed it to do, which was I needed to help me get to that place where I'm ready to be my best. And what it was actually accomplishing, all it was really doing for me at a certain point was checking the box. And that was when I started to go, okay, now we need to tweak, we need to adjust. And this is where I think, discipline does not mean becoming a slave to your routines. Like you still need to be aware and constantly be testing things and saying, does this still serve me? And this is where like the 5 a.m. wake up time, I realized like, this is not serving me anymore. I'm not getting my best work done because I'm tired. And so I need to change that. And that's scary. It's very scary when like you start to go away from this, but I think you have to do what's right for you, and it's different for everybody. So you have to tinker.
Great. Awesome. So I want to move into the final segment of the show. Our final 3 questions. We're asking these of every guest. So for you, where you've come along in your journey, where you are in your life, what is your definition of success?
This is such a good question. I think like I do a podcast with my buddy Austin Linney called the Brain Dump, where we study the psychology of success. And really, it's just an excuse to bring really badass people onto the podcast and ask them questions about like, why are they so awesome? But what I've come to realize is that most people have never really stopped to define success for themselves, and they don't realize that they get to define it. That it is not like their parents' measure of success. It's not society's. It's like for themselves. And so, for me, I've been wrestling with it for a number of years now, and I think this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson kind of surmises my feelings on like what resonates the most on this topic, which is the purpose of life is not to be happy. It's to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. And for me, when I look back on my life, I want to be able to say that it mattered that I was here, that I lived it as well as I could. And it's not about like in the moment happiness, it's about purpose and fulfillment and meaning. And so we've got to give Ralph a shout out there.
That's great. That's great. So my favorite Ralph Waldo Emerson is never, ever, ever give up.
Classic.
Okay, great. So question number 2, for someone who's new to investing or even just learning to focus on their goals and their path to success, do you have a book recommendation that would be helpful?
Yeah, the book that I gift the most is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. There's a translation by Gregory Hayes, which is fantastic. And a little context is helpful here. I think most people maybe aren't familiar with Marcus Aurelius. He was considered like the last great philosopher, king, or emperor. And he lived, thousands of years ago, ruled the known world. And Meditations is his personal journal. It wasn't something that he was writing for anybody else to read. It was really his daily journal, trying to wrestle with what's it mean to be a good person? What's it mean to live in alignment with that greatness that you have inside of yourself? And it's so interesting to see the things that he struggled with all those years ago are the same things that we struggle with today. Like being a human hasn't changed in thousands of years. And he has such incredible deep insights in there that have helped me frame, at least for myself, a structure around what does it mean to live a good life. And within that, I think is building a business and investing for the future. Like these are all concepts that they start by first working on yourself.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Very powerful. And I'm going to make sure that I add that book to my reading list.
You're going to love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. And this has really been a lot of fun for me. Truth be told, I was actually a little bit nervous coming into this call because you're such a professional. You have 2 podcasts, you're an author, coach, mentor, the whole thing. So it's been a lot of fun. How can we support you? How can people reach out to you, and in what ways can people support you?
I mean, if you'd like to learn about what we do on the investment side, you can go to invictusmultifamily.com. We talked a lot about the book, Passive Investing Made Simple. And if you want, you can go pick up a copy of that at thepassiveinvestingbook.com, or you can go to Amazon and pick it up there. Or if you're cheap like me, like I mentioned, I hate spending money. I hate it. And a $10 book, I think, is like the best investment you can ever make. But if you don't like spending money, that's totally cool. I get it. Just shoot me an email at anthony@invictusmultifamily.com. And here's what you got to do. If you leave a review for this podcast on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this, and then shoot me an email and say, I left a review, I'm cheap, I want a copy of the book, send me a copy. I'll send you a free physical copy of the book, but you have to leave a review and then email me.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you doing that.
We're going to bribe people into leaving some reviews.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I can give a positive review. Your book is excellent and really is a must read. So final question for you. So if you think back to a young Anthony Vicino around age 10 to 12 years old, knowing what you've learned so far in your journey, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to young Anthony or any preteen child to help guide him towards success?
Oh man, it's so okay. First is recognize nothing lasts forever, and that you don't have to do anything for the rest of your life. I think when you're young, you can get you get this recurring message of like, oh, what are you going to do when you go to school? And what are you going to study? What are you going to become? And you look at big adults and you're like, oh, my dad's a lawyer. My dad's a firefighter. My mom's an accountant. And that's what they are. And there will come a point in your life when you realize, oh my God, this thing that I thought I was, this thing I identified as, I no longer want to be that. And it will be one of the most traumatic moments in your life if you cling on to it. If you say, oh, this is my identity and I must hold on to it at all costs, it's going to hurt you. It's like holding on to a hot coal. The longer you hold on to it, the more it's going to hurt. And you have to realize it's okay to let it go. It's okay. At one point in my life, I was a professional rock climber and I let it go. And then I was a writer and then I let it go. It's okay to go through seasons in life and pick things up and try it. And when it no longer serves you, just let it go. And I see so many young people come like that, and old people too, like they struggle with this because they have this one identity locked in and they're just so afraid of letting it go and moving on to the next thing. It's like, hey, when the boat has a hole in it, sometimes it's not worth bailing it out. Sometimes it's worth just going and finding another boat.
Wow. That's great. That's great. And I guess the question, we often say to young people, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? And that creates a pressure, right? Of, I need to know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. You mentioned my wife, Shannon, earlier. She likes to say when we're going through things, positive or negative, that everything is temporary. Mm-hmm. And
so enjoy it.
Yeah.
Right.
And know that it's going to pass. If it's positive, this too shall pass. If it's negative, this too shall pass. Yeah. Interesting. That's great. Do you have two others?
So another one in that same vein is that nothing in this life is good or bad. And, it goes back to what we talked about before, a matter of perspective. Nothing is objectively good or bad. It's all a matter of interpretation. It's all a matter of your perspective and how you choose to accept it or not accept it. And so recognize that some things will happen in your life that you might deem bad, but objectively they're not bad things. It's just your reaction to them is bad. And so I find that to be a very powerful concept on its own, but it's incredibly difficult to deploy it day by day, because there are going to be things that happen in your life that you really do not want to have happen, right? When every young person will have their heart broken horribly at some point, and it will feel like the end of the world, and they will share their pain and suffering with their friends and their family and their loved ones, and their parents and their loved ones and the older people in their life will look at them and say, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And in the moment, you're going to look at them and be like, you don't know. My life is ending, right? But it's not. It's just maybe the best thing that's ever happened to you. But in the moment, it feels wrong. It feels bad. And so recognize there is no good or bad. It's just a matter of perspective and what you do with the information.
Great. All right. And number three?
Number three, don't take it all so seriously.
Excellent.
None of us are getting out of alive. Like, in the end, like the races, some of us are going to run a long race. Some of us are only going to get to run a short race. But at the end of the day, the race ends for us all. And there's no point in doing any of it if you hate it. If you hate it, why do it? And so if you find yourself in a job, if you find yourself in a relationship, if you find yourself in a situation that you just don't love your life, change it. You can do that. And there's no reason to hang on longer than is necessary, man. Because I know when you're young, you think you're going to live forever, but you might not. And you might as well make the most of it now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate all of your time. Thank you, everyone, for checking out the Healthy Investor Podcast. Appreciate my guest today, Anthony Vicino. You can, again, contact him at invictusmultifamily.com. Make sure you check out his book, Passive Investing Made Simple. Thanks so much, and make it a great day. Thanks so much for joining me on the Healthy Investor Podcast. Check out the show notes for more information about connecting with our guest. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please head on over to iTunes and leave a positive rating and review. It would mean the world to me. I'm grateful for your support, and I wish you an abundance of success on your journey to healthy investments and a healthy life.